Many Zimbabweans remember the good times, when their country was known as the breadbasket of Africa. But Zimbabwe has struggled to reclaim that title ever since it decided to revise a painful colonial legacy.
In Zimbabwe, my government has since 2 years ago been working on a comprehensive land reform program to redress the long-drawn historical imbalances in land distribution. Land that was largely in the hands of just about 4,500 commercial farmers has today begun to cater for up to 300,000 families.
Kindness Paradza got this farm in 2004. He works for the ruling party.
I've been doing well. I've been growing maize corn, which we call corn. Maize corn, white maize corn, under what we call command agriculture. So far I've delivered close to 2,800 tons.
The big dam and irrigation system that came with Paradza's land makes his one of the more productive farms in the country. But a majority of new landowners haven't had the same success.
What we need is to be serious as a government, to introduce a policy where we should help the black farmers who are into the land now, to make sure that they understand the value of farming, the value of agriculture.
Only several dozen white farmers have been left on their land, but the land grabs aren't over. We're off to Mangura. It's an agricultural area in the north where most of the farmland was taken from white owners and given to black Zimbabweans during land reform. We met Colin Nienaber, whose land was downsized twice. In August, he lost a long high court battle to stay on his farm.
We've been kicked off the farm. They're now occupying, there's 2 houses there. One is mine and one is my late father's house. My kids have come up here, my dad grew up here, my mother's buried there. I don't think the guys that are coming on here are genuine farmers. I've led to believe that one guy's a pharmacist.
In July this year, the number of incidents involving land grabs has spiked, according to the Commercial Farmers Union.
It always seems to flare up just before an election, and as we have an election next year in 2018, naturally we're seeing an escalation of farm takeovers, farm invasions, issues and problems out there, yeah.
Many farmers kicked off years ago live in poverty.
That's teabag.
These food parcels are going to pensioners. They're still waiting for compensation promised by the government.
It's tragic to think that people, for want of a decent settlement for payment by government, something that they, in all fairness, could reasonably expect, after 17 years are still waiting.
Zimbabweans are finding ways to cope. White commercial farmers are leasing land from black landowners, and they see high production in return. We're told that might even be the case on Kindness Paradza's farm.
I've heard stories that he's leased his land back to white farmers. And good luck to the white farmers and good luck to him. If I lose this place now, that's what I'll be doing.
You think there could be some kind of happy compromise?
I definitely think there could be some happy win-win situation. Well, that'd be a hard pill to swallow. But I'm a farmer, I want to farm. And if I have to share with somebody, so be it.
We've since learned that Colin's workers are also being evicted. In the ongoing tussle for land, those with less are still getting hurt the most. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers, Mangura.
Joining me now from Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, is David Connolly. He's a farmer whose land has been seized by the government, and he's now seeking compensation. And from Johannesburg, South Africa, is Themba Peter Mliswa. He's an independent member of parliament for Northern constituency, Zimbabwe. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. David, let me begin with you. They took your farm. Tell us what happened.
Well, basically, the land program, my farm, was first put up for designation in 1997. I fought that through the courts and I won my court case. There were a couple of guys settled on the farm and they were evicted. That was quite a long process. It took me about 5 years through to 2004. From then on, I was completely unaffected until 2014, the 1st of May 2014. The Deputy Secretary in the President's office, Dr. Ray Ntlakula, arrived on the farm and said that he was going to take it over. I made various inquiries and I managed to get a court order. Basically, the law says that the offer letter holder needs to go to court to get an eviction order against me. I was told by Ray Ntlakula that he knew and I knew that he wouldn't be able to do that, and so he was going to do it his way. And on the 14th of September, he evicted me from my land. I haven't been back since the 14th of September 2014, but I have. I've been to court. I've got Dr. Ray Ntlakula in contempt of court in the High Court. He's appealed against that. The appeal has not been heard yet.
And Themba, in Johannesburg, as a Zimbabwean MP, as somebody who's a beneficiary of land reform, I understand that you got a farm. When you hear David's story, do you feel any sympathy for him? Because here's a man who just wants to farm and he's lost his farm.
Listen, definitely David is young and he was hoping that he would certainly benefit from his forefathers' investments and so forth. But there is a history on that. There's the Lancaster Agreement, which we all know that did allow for that to happen when the white farmers were supposed to surrender some pieces of land to the majority of the people, who are the black people. They were given 10 years to do that, and the conservative government was very much in control of that. And I think when the government then changed hands from Conservative to Labour, Margaret Thatcher was for it, and then the Labour government got into power, and they were not able to fulfill that. So you must understand that there was nothing really illegal about what the government did in repossessing land, because duly this land is for the people, and the liberation struggle ethos and principles, founding principles, were based on empowerment of the Zimbabwean people who had been oppressed for a very long time by the Smith regime. So it is important to understand that certain measures had to be taken, and in short of those measures being taken, drastic affirmative action had to be taken, and that's why it was labeled as the fast-track land reform, because the white farmers were not willing to give away their tracts of land. As you heard in the summary, there were only over 4,000 farmers controlling tracts of land in Zimbabwe when the majority of the people were suffering. That's a situation which is not attainable, and no one can accept that. So the land reform had to happen to benefit the people of Zimbabwe, so that from an economic point of view, they would be empowered.
Okay, economic empowerment, and you say drastic, aggressive affirmative action. There's 17 years or so of hard empirical evidence to show that it hasn't worked. So what you have is a country that was the breadbasket of Africa, which is really struggling now economically. In hindsight, so theoretically and historically, fine, granted. In hindsight, Themba, would you agree that it failed because the economy collapsed along the way?
Listen, the truth of the matter is that you take care of your kith and kin, and as soon as the white farmers lost their land, there was also foreign currency direct investment was also affected. There was not a lot of money coming into the country. As a result, it did affect the production in terms of the agricultural sector. That's something that you cannot run away from, because we were also exporting to Europe and other countries. As a result, they had to defend their kith and kin. And it is something that we understand. So we're just going through that. It was a revolution, and in any revolution, you must also expect people to suffer in the process. But the truth of the matter is that we're now back on our feet. Command Agriculture, which is spearheaded by the Honorable Vice President Mnangagwa, is doing very well in terms of ensuring that we don't import maize, which is really important. We are doing very well already. 500,000 tons of maize has been delivered, and we're looking forward to a bumper harvest. So to me, people are empowered. I'm empowered as a farmer, as a black person. I employ people. I am doing very well on my farm. I have cattle. I'm contributing to the GDP of the country. And what we are also doing is we're working with some of the white farmers who are prepared to transfer skills to us. We do admit that there's got to be skills transfer. And the whites still have a place in the farming sector of Zimbabwe. As you can see, most of them are actually leasing farms. They're managers of farms and so forth. And they're more than happy to work with us. But it's a win-win situation.
Okay, so let's ask David, do you feel as if you still have a role to play in the system where you can maybe lease a farm from a black-owned farm and find a way to farm in that way?
Imran, I think the foundation of this whole problem, is the lack of a bankable property right. Commercial farming by its very nature is cyclical, and you have to borrow money from the bank at various periods during the year. And to be able to borrow that money, you need to have a bankable property right. And that has always been my issue with this, what is termed to be fast-track land reform, is that the bankable property right was destroyed. In 1980, there were 15 million hectares of commercial land with a property right and a deeds office that was a bankable commodity. It was live capital. 4 million hectares of that was transferred to government between 1980 and basically 1998. We heard from Temba there where the British government failed to fulfill the Lancaster House agreements. There's all sorts of things revolving around that. But the facts on the ground were that in 1998, there was still 11 million hectares of land under the control of commercial farmers, the majority of which were white. Yep. But that 11 million hectares of land had a bankable, it was bankable. You could go to the banks, and farmers were borrowing on an annual basis from the banks in 1998 about $700-800 million US on an annual basis. Right. That created work for lawyers, it created work for bank managers, it created work for all insurance companies, for all sorts of people, David, to be able to...
And that's a fair economic argument, and forgive me for interrupting, because I sort of want to keep this moving forward. But given that Temba appealed to history, right, and I think the two of you definitely disagree on the very foundations of this discussion, and history is often invoked. A lot of Robert Mugabe's supporters invoke history. When you look at 1980 or just after independence, when you had, say, just over 6,000 white farmers owning 2/3 of the land, would you agree, David, with the argument historically, and let's take economics and put it to the side for a second, would you agree that after coming out of a racist, unfair system on the majority, that the majority of Zimbabweans felt something needed to be done, but eventually what was done incorrectly? Do you agree that something needed to be done, David?
100%, Imran. And, you know, as a commercial farmer, it's not an easy job. And you're involved 18 hours a day in making sure that your operation is successful. I was part of an organization called Zimbabwe Joint Resettlement Initiative in 2000. And I was put onto that committee by the Commercial Farmers Union. And we came to government with 1.5 million hectares of land that we were prepared to hand over. We were prepared to put inputs. We were prepared to put skills. Temba's already spoken of skills transfer. In 2000, we were prepared to do that. It was a fully documented program that we put to government. And once we had done the 1.5 million hectares, we were prepared to move forward from that with 200,000 hectares a year. That would have been a very well organized and structured and would have increased the production on commercial agriculture. I sat and we met with Olivia Machena, who was the minister in the president's office, and I very quickly realized that this land program, in fact, was not, they didn't want successful production. It was basically, they had lost a referendum in February of 2000, and they needed to protect and maintain the power that they had. And it was purely and simply about that. And I go back to the economic thing, if they had given property right, bankable property right to the people, we would never ever have lost the production that we've lost. You know, Temba has spoken, and in your clip before we started discussing, you know, I've got a number of friends that are in partnership with black farmers who have taken money from banks and can't repay that money, and that's why they've got into the partnership with these guys, and they're getting them out. But in the long term, if you want to really put in long-term development, you have to have a bankable property right.
Okay.
And that is what I'm fighting for.
Themba, what happens to the farms and land reform in general after Mugabe? The president's not a young man. He's 93 years old. He's not going to be around forever. This has been shaped in his image. What's going to happen after him?
Listen, it has shaken his image outside Zimbabwe because certainly it has affected people who had invested in Zimbabwe and who were taking care of the minority in terms of funding. And as David says, agriculture is about funding. And the truth of the matter is that the white farmers had access to funding, and that's why they were productive at the end of the day. And the black farmers don't have access to that. And the issue of tenure is important. And I agree with David that you need to have a bankable project, but equally you need to have collateral for it. And I think the way forward is to ensure that there are title deeds given to all the farm owners so that the banks can be secure in terms of giving money. That's something I agree with him, and I think that's something that we need to push even as a legislator. I sit on the Committee on the Lands and the Agriculture Parliamentary Committee. That's something that we need to do. We visited a number of farms and so forth. And we need to rehabilitate the farms as well in terms of irrigation, in terms of the tobacco curing system, which is equally improved. But what is important to understand is that the white farmers also decided to get into politics at the end of the day. It's not a secret. Dave knows that they now started supporting the opposition party. And you would know that anybody, any government in power that feels threatened by a certain grouping of people who are the minority but are well financed and are financing an opposition party, they'll equally fight back. And the fight got out of hand when the white farmers then started funding MDC, and this was videoed and shown on TV and so forth.
That's not illegal, is it? I mean, it's a democracy. It's not illegal to support whoever you want to support in a democracy.
You see, that's democracy, but I'm just giving you a true picture, scenario of what caused for that radical fast-track land reform, when David clearly and correctly says that there were negotiations happening, one man, one farm. It's also something which the white farmers were supposed to exercise. They were not prepared to remain with one farm, and they were given that opportunity. As a result, they got involved in politics, and if you get involved in politics, it's a dirty game, as we know. And they were trying to push the sitting government out, and the sitting government decided to then take radical action, which led to the farm invasions and so forth, and the whole thing became chaotic, and I think all of us are to blame for that. While I support the land reform, I think order needs to come back in terms of readdressing some of the issues that happened during that. And I think I find solace in that there are some white farmers who are already on the ground, who we are talking to. They were very sentimental to this. They were very traumatized and so forth. But there's only one great farming region in this world. There's only one great farming country in this world. That's Zimbabwe. David knows that wherever he can go. They went to Zambia, they went to Mozambique, and my appeal to them, come back home. You're Zimbabweans, and I think we have matured democratically. We're able to work together, produce, and to me, that's what I'd like to see the new Zimbabwe. Our generation cannot inherit the history that has been there of our forefathers. We must be people who look ahead, who are able to come up with a solution which will make sure that the economy of the country is where it is. There are good schools and good land, good fishing dams. Kariba Dam is there. So I'm inviting all the white farmers to come back and start working with us. We are also aware as black farmers that we don't have the capacity to financially, neither do we have the skills. So let's combine that and let's take Zimbabwe forward. The land must always remain with the majority, and it's not a secret that the land is still with the black people, but we must produce, and we are on track. And I invite all of them, even the international investors, to come in and invest in agriculture.
Let me get a final response from David then, because we are out of time. David, does that encourage you at all?
I'm very encouraged with what Themba's had to say there. You know, at the end of the day, we're all Zimbabweans. At the end of the day, we've all got to sit around the table and we've got to resolve this problem as Zimbabweans, you know. What I have found from experience is that if you're involved in commercial agriculture, you need a lot of funding. And to get that funding and for the banks to be secure in funding you, you have to have a property right. I have no doubt that we will overcome this, and in 20 years' time, we will again be we'll be the breadbasket of the Southern African region. But it has to be based on property right.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to both of you, David Connolly and Themba Peter Mliswa. Thanks so much for taking the time to appear on the Newsmakers.